We're moving on to motion number 8 in the name of the PCS, Coordinated Action on Pay. Is the proposer and seconder from the PCS here, please? Can you move to the front?
Conference, Barney Lawn, PCS, moving motion 8. I think it's great that we've seen, shall we say, the whole gathering together and identifying. I think that there is action, and I think action needed in the future. I know as part of our own union, we've been certainly, PCS have been a front liner in taking on the Tory government. And yeah, we have paid our price, we've paid our dues, but that didn't mean that it was set back and didn't continue the fight, and we will continue to do so. And I think within this motion here, what we're looking for is that we have the support and the wider concept of the trade union movement working as one, I suppose, in isolation. We all know with the outcome of the UK election, the Tory ideology has been very clear. It's cuts, cuts and more cuts, which they aim to implement as quickly and as harshly as possible. And I think tomorrow's budget will bear fruit to that statement. The only real opposition to the austerity is the trade union movement. We know this, but they also know it. That's why they're trying to introduce new legislation to make strike action more difficult in general, and in some areas nearly impossible. The only way the trade union movement can defeat the austerity agenda, protect public services, welfare and terms and conditions is by working together in unity and fighting like we've never fought before. We need to commit ourselves to opposing the cuts, privatisation, anti-union legislation and further attacks on pay and pensions. Austerity is an ideological choice. It's not a fiscal necessity. We all know that it hasn't worked to date. The deficit was supposed to be eradicated. It's still 90 billion. The debt that Osborne said would be 67.4% of GDP now is actually 80.2%. Yeah, the cuts and the misery are very real for the majority of society. It's all pain and no gain, except, of course, for those at the top, the richest 1% or so, who have continued to do very well, helped by Osborne cutting 50% tax rate to 45%. Members' take-home pay has also been affected by increased pension contributions and their living standards driven down. Cuts to local services impacting the widest of society, hiking VAT to 20%, cuts to tax credits and other in-work benefits. In fact, some public sector workers are 20% worse off a year following real-term cuts and pay and pension increases. What's the motivation? The public sector pay freeze and now the cap is about balancing the books and the backs of dedicated public servants, and it's about driving down wages to make public services more attractive for privatisation. That means joint coordinated industrial action with joint demands and a joint strategy. The public sector pay cap is a public sector-wide policy, and it can only be defeated by us being united together in action in our demands and in our strategy. Congress, support the motion. Let's work together to defeat the public sector pay cap and get a fair deal for our members. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Barney. Is seconder for that motion? Formally? Okay. Look, we're just going to proceed to try and get the rest of the motions in this section finished. So if people who are moving motions could come up to the front. So the mover of motion number 9 in the name of NIPSA. You want to speak on this one? Go ahead.
Nearly not getting speaking. Sisters and brothers, Lucia Collins, NIPSA fully supporting and endorsing PCS's call out to unions for a coordinated strategy on pay and pensions. Comrades, this has been our continued fight, and many times over the last few years we have risen to the challenge, and we must avoid being left there again. We must avoid that happening again. Our democratic socialist principles make us as trade unionists never to give up, never to stop being positive that we're doing everything we can to rebuild the movement. The motion concentrates on getting an early message out to everyone in this conference of what each one of us need to do, north, south and UK-wide. How many times do we talk about developing a strategy and not delivering? We had a strategy, we delivered. We brought thousands out on March the 13th. We tried to keep that momentum up so we could deliver again prior to the general election. That didn't happen, but it doesn't mean that we won't rise to the occasion again. We have to be thankful for unions that keep bringing motions to platforms where we can highlight the difficulties and develop policies to continue to kick the message home. We must do that every time if that's what needs to be done. Also, these policies endorsed by our members need to be implemented by all of the trade union leadership. I didn't write my speech until I listened to the President's address, and I welcome that he's saying what all the union members on the ground are saying. He called for a joint, united, cross-community opposition platform to Tory austerity cuts. But we must also recognise that these are Assembly in Northern Ireland and Tory austerity cuts that have adversely impacted on us, and we cannot shy away from the fight back. To that speaker from Dublin Trades Council who said do not exclude certain sections who can work for a better future, who said that Northern Ireland is only an administration, I'd ask you, why would you embrace austerity parties? What difference does that make when in Northern Ireland 77 MLAs voted to cut our pensions, diminish our compensation scheme and created an impact we're feeling more every day in our pockets? Every public sector union member is feeling this impact. For the civil service, the reality of the Stormont House Agreement is now that they're coming for our jobs. This is a class issue. The Assembly, as previous speakers have said, will borrow $700 million to make 20,000 civil servants redundant, working class people and jobs that we will never get back. The next period will cause economic devastation that can only be opposed by a proper political fight back on the ground, out in the streets, in the communities, and especially in the trades councils. NIPSA is mandated to take strike action, mandated to link up to willing unions. So let's endorse the PCS strategy and draw up a plan that all unions can be mandated. Let all the trade unions be responsible for developing a strategy. Let's start with a 24-hour general strike against their problem of a system built for nothing, only the search for profit. Let's build a strategy of a coalition of willing unions to match and beat the general election of Tory and Assembly capitalists. Comrades, please support the motion.
Thank you, sir.